It's here. We are redefining what it means to sit at the girls' table. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Girls Table, a podcast where founders, careers, and investors share their stories. Today, I'm joined by Tyler Denk, who is the founder of the newsletter platform Beehiiv. Tyler started his first company during his undergraduate years when he became a self-taught software developer and launched his startup VentureStorm, which is a platform connecting entrepreneurs with talented software developers. Following exiting VentureStorm, Tyler joined Morning Brew as the second employee in a role that spanned from engineering, product, and growth, and he was responsible for building the renowned referral program that facilitated the company to scale to a successful $75 million exit in 2020. After this, Tyler co-founded Beehiiv, one of the top platforms that empower creators and publishers to monetize and grow their audience. Tyler, how are you doing today? Thanks so much for coming on The Girls Table.
Yeah, not a girl, but happy to be here and glad to see that you know how to read my LinkedIn bio. So I'm glad it's put to good use.
Yeah, so before we dive into Beehiiv, I really just want to talk about you and where you started. So as a kid, did you always see yourself as an entrepreneur, or did it you just decided to start something early on in your undergraduate years?
Yeah, so my grandfather actually started a shoe store in downtown Baltimore that employs all of my uncles. And so I kind of saw small business entrepreneurship growing up. My dad started a car detailing business on weekends and days off. So I kind of saw him hustling and building a business there. And then I've always been someone interested, I think more so because I'm very opinionated about things. And so when I see things that aren't done well or that piss me off, I like to think that I could do something better or there's a better solution to solve a problem. So I've always been entrepreneurial in that sense. And I've always loved tech and startups and the stories of Silicon Valley. So as an interest point in my life, it's been learning about how some of these massive companies have been built previously and the different methods and solutions that they've implemented along the way to really see success at a massive scale.
Awesome. And you started your first startup, actually, VentureStorm, and you taught yourself how to actually learn code and be a software developer. So how did this idea first come to be? And then how did you take this idea from 0 to 1?
Yeah, it was pretty multi-step. It was initially an app called Juketree that was kind of like Twitter meets SoundCloud and discovering music with friends. So you would follow friends with good taste in music. You would see what they're listening to. You could branch it to your Vine. It was a whole thing. And we went down this rabbit hole trying to build that and realized that we didn't have the tech skills to build it. We couldn't actually code this project. And so we looked around. I was in a few different entrepreneurship programs at the University of Maryland, and everyone in these business classes had amazing ideas, but very few actually could build them. And then right across campus, there was computer science program, top 15 computer science program in the country. And all of these students looking for projects to work on and advance their resume and skill set. And not that they didn't have ideas, but there was clearly a surplus of ideas in the business school and entrepreneurship program and a surplus of students looking for experience in computer science. And so we kind of pivoted from, okay, we can't build this mobile app that we want to let's try to build a platform that would facilitate connecting entrepreneurs and startups and software developers on the same campus. And then we ran into the same problem there. It's wait, we also can't build this problem. And so we finally were why don't we just teach ourselves how to code? Let's take online courses on Ruby on Rails. Let's build an HTML and JavaScript and teach ourselves. And so me and my two co-founders, both students at the University of Maryland, taught ourselves how to build a website on Ruby on Rails and create this two-sided marketplace. So it was a series of trying to solve our own problems by eventually teaching ourselves how to code to help other people solve that problem.
Wow. And what eventually led you to stopping VentureStorm and joining Morning Brew?
Yeah, so we did that, I think sometime in sophomore years when we started. Junior, senior year, I forewent having a traditional internship. I was a mechanical engineering major at school. So where most people in my classes were getting all of these interesting mechanical engineering internships in Washington, D.C. and contracting jobs in D.C. and Baltimore, I was so stubborn. I was what a waste of time. I'm building my own startup. This is so much cooler. This is going to be a multi-million-dollar startup where I'm building my own thing. And that resulted in one, like a lot of sacrifice and work. Two, I made no money in the summer because I was building and tinkering with my own startup instead of getting paid to get like internship experience. So we did that junior, senior year. We graduated. I have a ton of student debt. And so I like when the debt became due, like 6 months after graduating, I was like doing the true like entrepreneurial, living in my parents' basement, had $2 in my bank account, was turning down plans on the weekends with friends because I legit didn't have money. And at some point, it just became clear that I don't think that we had the right business model to make this company succeed. And then I was living at home broke with student debt bills coming due. And so it became time to like actually pivot into something that made me money. And so I ended up just doing consulting gigs and doing a bunch of freelance work for small businesses, building Shopify websites, or other businesses like coding WordPress, and just trying to find different opportunities while applying to full-time jobs. And in that circuit of applying for full-time jobs and doing freelance, Austin Reef, who's a co-founder and then COO, now CEO of Morning Brew, reached out and was like, do you have any interest in helping us build this social share feature where at the bottom of every story, you could share Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. He's like, the Skim has it, Axios has it. We don't have an engineer on our team, but we'll pay you $3,000 to build that. And I had like legit, I think $1.50 in my bank account. I have the screenshot somewhere on my phone of like less than $5. And it was like probably the closest I've ever been to being depressed. And he said, $3,000, can you do it? And I was like, absolutely. Had no idea what I was doing, but I wanted $3,000. So figured it out over the course of 3 weeks. Almost gave up, I think like 5 or 6 times, where I clearly didn't have the experience to do this, but it'd be like 3 a.m. and I had no idea how to get to the next step. And I almost emailed him so many times telling him like, I'm out, like I don't think I can do this. And somehow like pushed through, eventually got like it working. And then once I delivered on that, they paid me the $3,000. He was like, we have 50 other things that we've always wanted to do, but we've never had an engineer to do it. So while you're applying for full-time jobs, if you just want to keep taking things off this to-do list, we'll pay you hourly. So my contract work at Morning Brew that summer grew from that one project to like 40, 50, 60 hours a week, just building stuff for them, kind of proving that I could do stuff to provide value. Finally got a job offer at Deloitte being a technology consultant in DC. I had like a lease with a friend in DC. My girlfriend was in DC. Like my whole life was like right there to move to DC and join like the very safe company, safe paycheck in being a consultant at Deloitte. And then out of nowhere, Austin's like, what would you think about joining Morning Brew full time, moving up to New York? And at the time they were 50,000 subscribers, very small. There's 3 of them working out of like an NYU like incubator dorm situation. And so like anything but a sure thing. And I have a ton of student debt. And so I kind of like weighed on that decision for a while. And one of my friends gave me great advice. He was like, you could be one of 40,000 people doing the exact same thing at Deloitte, or you could be the only person in the world building Morning Brew in this exact role. And so I kind of bet on myself, dropped everything in DC, moved up to New York and joined Morning Brew as the second full-time employee in the fall of 2017.
That's crazy. Also a great friend to give you that advice. Do you feel like you had the support of your parents, or were they like, you are crazy, you have student debt, go do the safe route, go work at Deloitte?
Yeah, so my parents have always been incredibly supportive of me. There's also like a bit baked into like they didn't go to college. I was the first one in my family to go to college. And so I was kind of not like a trailblazer, but like I figured out how to apply to colleges, how to get like loans for colleges, how to apply to jobs. Like I was kind of leading my own path without their direction from early on. So I've always been really independent. It was the first time where being closer to home and having a job from a massive Big Four company that was a guaranteed paycheck plus health insurance plus 401k and everything was something that to them seemed much safer. And the only time they really kind of leaned in to give me their preference, which was take the safer option, which I think most parents would typically give that advice. But they also trusted me to make my own decision. And so I was like, the cool thing about working at Morning Brew over the summer was I had full access to everything like you typically do in a startup. And I saw the inbox, I saw the replies, I saw how interested everyone was. And hey, I can't start my day without reading Morning Brew. I've told all my friends, all my family, all my colleagues about this newsletter. Like, I absolutely love it. So I kind of saw the passion from their readers that they were onto something. And I also like really trusted Alex, Austin, and the team there as like operators. So I kind of put my foot out and said, I believe in the vision. Like, I think that there's a real opportunity there. And my parents were supportive of kind of whatever I wanted to do.
Yeah, I had the parents that were like, go the safe route, study accounting, work at Deloitte, work at KPMG. So I definitely had that in my ear. But you started at the second employee at Morning Brew and basically stayed up until when they eventually sold. So how did those experiences shape you to actually co-found Beehiiv? And then how long were you actually at Morning Brew for before you started Beehiiv?
Yeah, so I was there for 3.5 years. I rave about the experience all the time because like right time, right place, and like right team and buy-in that I had from them. I moved up to New York. I was 22, 23. I didn't really have a boss. Like Austin was my boss, but they hired me because they trusted me to make my own decisions. And so I would go to Austin and say, I think we should spend a few months building this. And he'd be like, that sounds logical to me. Go ahead and do that. And like, I was very autonomous in my role. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. I was so wide-eyed in New York City for the first time and just like meeting with people from the Skim and from Axios and like the New York Times, like learning how they were scaling their businesses. I knew nothing about email. So I was just like taking demos with every email provider and like asking them 100 questions of like how they do certain things and learning on the job by going through demos and asking like how things were done at these other companies. And then I was running growth and spending $500,000 a month on like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, like any sort of like paid acquisition. And like, I didn't know how to do that. So I was just testing everything. I was in Photoshop creating the copy. I was looking at other companies that were advertising and like taking YouTube tutorials of like how to use Facebook Ad Manager. And so I say it was like the best role ever because I was running product engineering and growth. I was like totally autonomous. As long as I was delivering, we were growing, everything worked. They were like giving me more responsibilities. And while everyone else in my peer group was like 24, like bottom of the totem pole, I was like also, I guess, bottom of the totem pole, but I was running an interview process and hiring for my team and spending $500,000 a month and just building our own tech for the team to use. So it was as much white space as possible. And it depends on, like, I guess, who you are. Some people could crumble of like almost like paralysis of like, I don't know what to do. But I viewed it as like there's infinite things to learn and get better at. And I want to be really good at creating product. I want to build product that actually moves the needle. And I want to grow the newsletter as quickly as possible. And they just trusted me. And so there's like a lot of like luck involved too. There was the luck that Alex and Austin had the belief in me to allow me to give me all of that space. There was the luck that they were also probably super busy doing 18 other things as like a small startup that they didn't have the time to like micromanage and give me like set restrictions. And then luck that the things that I decided to double down and optimize like ended up working. Because I'm sure if I was like, hey, let's spend $500,000 on this and it flopped, there would then be a lot more restrictions on what I was allowed to do because I've like just wasted $500,000. So partially luck, partially just like knowing that there was a lot of pressure. It was my first ever full-time job. So I didn't want to fail. And I took a lot of responsibility of they're paying me like a decent salary. And I'm not someone who wants to like be on payroll and not be earning what you're paying me. So I've always kind of had a chip on my shoulder to over deliver. And yeah, it ended up working out great for the 3.5 years.
Yeah, just graduating college to have that much responsibility is huge. And was there a day or maybe a month or a time while working at Morning Brew that you were like, wow, I see so many challenges in the newsletter platform industry. I want to start my own company. Like, where did Beehiiv come from?
Yeah, so the great thing about email is you can get feedback just from people replying to the email. And Morning Brew is actually great at having either the writers and then eventually interns going through all of our responses in the inbox and actually seeing what people were asking or like feedback. A lot of it was like critical of, I don't agree with your stance on this story, but a lot of it was your referral program's amazing. Like, what software do you use? Or your email looks beautiful. Like, what are you doing to create this perfect email newsletter template and whatever it was? And the more feedback and touch points that we would get of people interested in like our software, what they wanted was, oh, we use platform X, like we recommend them. But the truth was like we weren't using a third-party software. It was all custom built, and I had built most of it. And then eventually with my team of engineers. So there was a clear demand and appetite for like the output, whether it was the referral program, whether it was the email template, whether it was the CMS, whether it was the website. And all these people wanted was just to know who we were using, but it was all custom built that we had built and like I had built internally. And so that was like a huge signal that there's an appetite for what we're building. Around the same time, Substack raised like a massive round. And like there were other newsletter platforms emerging, and then also just newsletter players. So the Skim raised like a massive round. Axios was getting very popular. The Hustle was very popular. There was like Puck and all of these other newsletter initiatives starting. And so newsletter as a category, I think, was expanding. And then the touch points and signals I was receiving of the writers forwarding me emails from readers asking about the 5 things that we do really well and who we use to do that all together. It was kind of like the impetus for there being an opportunity here.
Awesome. So you're seeing this. People are hearing of Substack. Beehiiv comes in. They basically have taken the newsletter publishing platform by storm. So who did you decide to co-found Beehiiv with, and how long did it take you to get that first MVP?
Going back to when I was 24, leading like this hiring process, the first job that I ever hired for was just like another software engineer. So I was building everything at Morning Brew for I think the first year. So the website we built, the templates we built, I built a CMS for the writers to actually create the content and output stories into the website and the newsletter. And then eventually just hit like a bottleneck of needing more bandwidth. And so I hired a software engineer, and that ended up being Ben, who's my co-founder now, one of my co-founders at Beehiiv. And he was just like the most personable, creative engineer I've ever met. And it was special for me because it was the first person I've ever hired. But after looking at hundreds of candidates, they were all like, okay. And then this one person went above and beyond and was like by far like the best take-home project. He was so thoughtful in his answers. He was like so good at what he did and was so creative as an engineer. Like I've never seen anything like that. And so working with him for like the 2 years after that, after hiring him, was amazing. He was someone who you like give a task to do, and he'd come back over the weekend and it's 10 times better than like your best case scenario of what you were expecting. So he was like always special and fun to work with. And we would always kind of talk about what it would look like to maybe white label the tech that we had built at Morning Brew, or just, I think as an engineer, you want to build for millions of people, not just a few people. And what our role ended up being at Morning Brew as we scaled was building a lot of internal tools for the sales team, for the marketing team, for the growth team, for the content team and the writers, which is cool. And like that experience was invaluable for understanding what sales wanted, what the writers wanted, but it was being used by 35 people internally. And I think as like an engineer, you want to build something that like scales and millions of people around the world play with. So he was one of my co-founders. And then on my way out, as I was leaving Morning Brew to like fill like bandwidth, we needed another engineer, and he recruited who was one of his good friends at Clemson, also another software engineer who he claimed was like the smartest person he knew, which was Jake. So when we went to start Beehiiv as like a side project, I was like, Ben, you're the smartest person I know. Like I'm only building this business if you're in. And he's like, well, Jake's the smartest person I know. And so I was like, okay, well, that sounds great. So it became us 3. And to answer your question more directly, I left Morning Brew October of 2020. We started probably a few weeks after as like a weekend like side project, and then launched Beehiiv formally November 2021. So about like a full year of kind of building an MVP on the side.
Wow. So you launch it. How did you acquire those first users to really go ahead and switch over? Because a lot of people who already had a newsletter were using Substack or somewhere else. And you guys, at least now, make it really easy to switch over to Beehiiv. But what was it like back then? And how'd you convince people to use you guys as opposed to the other ones?
Yeah, the strategy seems so obvious in retrospect. I don't know why more companies don't do it. But our seed round was primarily strategic investors of people who have a newsletter, have a large audience on Twitter or LinkedIn, or have experience and like power and influence in the media and newsletter space. So Social Leverage was our lead investor for our seed, but we then had, I think, 15 to 25 strategic angels who already had a newsletter on another platform. And so part of the go-to-market was they're obviously financially incentivized for us to succeed. We made sure we had maybe not feature parity, but enough features that like you could move over and it wasn't actually hurting their day-to-day operations. And the hope is, and like I always use liquidity as an example in this, like liquidity, large like finance meme account on like Twitter and Instagram, but he also has a newsletter at the time about 100,000 people called ExecSum, and he was using another competitor, not Substack. And so he invested as a strategic seed investor. He then moved his newsletter over to support his portfolio company. And like the next day, these 100,000 people that have been receiving his email for months now see a better newsletter, a better template. It has a referral program. It has polls. It's refreshed. It's hosted on a better looking website. So like overnight, people notice like there's been a big improvement. And at the bottom, it shows powered by Beehiiv. And so the benefit of our market is our users have an audience. So it's not like a one-to-one sale. It's a one-to-one sale where he's now projecting his product to 100,000 people who now have some touch point with us as a company. And so you multiply that ExecSum liquidity example times like the 15 to 20 other strategic investors. And then people will respond to liquidity being like, yo, your newsletter looks amazing. Like, what did you do? He's like, oh, I just moved over to Beehiiv. It's like a new company that I'm like working with. And now we have another lead gen for a new user. We kind of just continued to repeat that process. So that was like the main go-to-market is just like raising money from your actual like early adopters, which I think is a great suggestion for most entrepreneurs and startups in the early days. And then just like product-led growth. Throughout the year that we were building it as a side project, I was constantly consulting with people using our competitors because like I was nervous as a founder to be like, are we sure we want to launch this and build this and commit to this? Because if our competitors can get there first or build a better product or fix things that people are currently complaining about, then our opportunity diminishes pretty quickly. And so I'd constantly be checking in with people using those platforms. And they're like, don't worry, like they haven't launched anything or they're still not focusing on XYZ areas. And when you hear what XYZ is over and over again, to me, that's like, let's address XYZ first, because that's like the opportunity in the market that our competitors aren't focusing on. Meanwhile, if that's what these people of like these 10, 15 people that I've been talking to keep complaining about, when I launch and tell them we've actually focused and primarily are building an experience to solve XYZ, then they're more inclined to move over as well. So it was some combination of early adopters, strategic investors, talking to people while building. And then as soon as we flip the switch, knowing what features to prioritize and how to move those people over.
Yeah, and I feel like you guys are executing so quickly. You've achieved over 40% month-over-month growth, which is absolutely insane. And I know when I was starting my newsletter for the Girls Table, I really looked up like, okay, what's everybody using? What are all the platforms, some of the newsletters that I follow? And I kept seeing Beehiiv like again and again. So I just want to say like congrats, because I think it's crazy how much you guys have grown and how much of like user acquisition you guys have done and acquired. So it's pretty awesome how quickly you guys have grown.
Yeah, and I think to your point, a lot of it is like monkey see, monkey do, which is like what we did at Morning Brew as well. When we were vetting different email platforms, we were the youngest, smallest newsletter in like that space. And so we looked at, again, like the Skim and Axios, like what tech were they using? Because we just blindly assumed as a larger team with more money, they did more diligence than we could do. And they also were doing a lot of the things that we wanted to, but we couldn't. So the assumption was if they can do XYZ things on that platform, if we move to that platform, we could also do those things. So our diligence process was short-circuited by looking at what the competition was doing in the newsletter space and who they were using. And that made us more informed about what platforms we should be utilizing. And so that's been like my growth strategy with Beehiiv from day one is if we can go after the larger newsletters like an ExecSum or any of our like more enterprise large media publications, my guess is a lot of people look up to those newsletters and they like the style, the writing, the referral program, the growth trajectory. A lot of people will blindly follow who the leaders in the space are using because if it's trusted by them, it can be trusted by like a smaller hobbyist project or like just a smaller operation in general. And so we build things and target power users, knowing that the long tail are constantly looking at those leading. So I guess our plan has worked to date.
Yeah, and I think that's super interesting how you really utilize your strategic investors to help grow you guys too. So how did you approach this? Because you make it sound easy. You're like, just go to the biggest people in the newsletter industry, see the ones that are posting and get them to invest. But how were you able to actually get them on board and investing in you guys, which was so much different than what was out there today?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of it's luck. A lot's like privilege of like I was in New York for 3.5 years building Morning Brew. Morning Brew went on to become one of the more successful, notable newsletter companies. And I think people are very attached to stories and narratives. So early days of Beehiiv, the product is the worst it'll ever be. We just haven't built everything that we need to. And so what we lean on is the story, the narrative, and the experience of like the founders. And so saying like, this is the platform that was started by 3 early Morning Brew engineers adds a lot of credibility into they've already built Morning Brew. They know how to scale a successful newsletter. So maybe the narrative I would have to go to these people with are, we don't have the flashiest features yet. They're coming and we have the engineering bandwidth to build it. But trust us that we know what we're building and we know the process that we should be building it, what matters, what doesn't matter. And we're doing it from the lens of we've seen this before. And this is something that our competitors don't have that experience of being in the weeds and actually understanding what data to attribute, what features move the needle, what's complete vanity and like not really important in the newsletter space for content creation and growth. And so leaning into that early days, and we still lean into the Morning Brew story for sure, because most people still haven't heard of Beehiiv. But that was a big part of like going to market with investors and fundraising is like the founder market fit of we have done this before. Morning Brew is extremely successful. We just got acquired by Business Insider, and then just leveraging my network from people that I have met in New York. But it definitely wasn't easy raising money. When we raised money, Substack was like the new age newsletter platform that just raised a ton of money from A16Z. Twitter just acquired Review, I think like a year earlier. And so now Twitter is in the space of like email newsletters. Facebook just launched Bulletin, which was their attempt to get into the newsletter space. And then there's all of the incumbents and legacy platforms like MailChimp, ActiveCampaign, Campaign Monitor. So it's a very competitive space. So when I went, despite all of the story and narrative and success that we had at Morning Brew, I'd say raising money back in 2021 was not like streamlined and super simple.
Not as easy as this last round, at least, when I'm begging you to get allocation. But, well, that's super interesting. Now I want to get into some challenges, because I feel like it sounds like it was just kind of uphill from when you first started, but you were building for years. So was there ever a time during that year after kind of you had Morning Brew, you're starting to build this on the side and you're like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? You're seeing all the other companies raise money and come to market. Did you ever, like, do you remember a time when you just wanted to kind of give up and stop building it?
I feel like almost anyone who is an entrepreneur or like starts something or debates starting something and ends up not to is constantly looking at the competition, the market, the landscape, and almost like looking for outs, which I think is actually pretty healthy. I was so paranoid and going to this like little group of 20 people using our competitors, constantly asking them, because I had a thesis of what we could do and how we could go to market and how we could stand out from the competition. And the entire time I had that thesis, it was only like, what I don't know. And any one of our competitors could have launched a feature to compete with what I thought was going to be a core competitive advantage of ours. Or that, XYZ platform that has been slow to launch these 5 things suddenly wakes up or catches wind of what we're doing while we're still in beta, like building like the MVP, and they get to market first. And then we're totally flat-footed of my whole pitch of what I was going to investors of here's why we're different and here's how we're going to succeed becomes a totally moot point because our competitors woke up and did these few things that I was banking on them not doing. So while you're in like this stealth MVP stage, like every day I'd wake up waiting for the news to drop that all of our competitors just launched a feature that would compete with something that I was looking to do. And so that's like a paranoia that I feel like almost every founder has early days. So that was always really tough. That's the thing about competition. I always said it was like a running joke to get feature parity with our competition, but we compete with so many different companies and the space is so competitive and large. Like feature parity doesn't really exist because they're also constantly innovating and building features and making them better. Yes, I'd say the entire year leading up while this was a side project was extremely challenging. I'd also say just like on a personal level, it's really hard. I mean, there's like 2 jobs. So we were moonlighting. We had our full-time jobs. Ben and Jake were at Morning Brew. I was at YouTube. And we had full-time jobs that were more or less pretty demanding. Theirs probably more than mine. But you would close your work laptop at 5, 6 p.m. and for them probably even later. And they are both married and like have wives and like families. To then be like, oh, now that it's 8 p.m., like we have to grind for 3 to 4 hours because there's an opportunity here. And if we don't launch and get there, like our competitors will as well. So they kind of like coincide, right? There's the anxiety that they're going to launch something the entire time. And then there's the demanding take of like, they have full teams of 40, 50, 60 people building their product to make it better. We're 3 people doing this part-time on nights and weekends. And like, there was no, like, it was fortunately, or probably fortunately, it was during COVID. So I had less distractions of, oh, I can't go out this weekend to party or go to the beach or whatever. It was like, there's nothing else to do. So I'm going to put in my headphones and code all day long. But there's also like that always on component. There was no breaks, and I ruined a few of their vacations as well, I think, during this period.
Oh, I could only imagine. I mean, you were at my dinner the other day and you're like, oh, wow, my website just went down. And then you had to go deal with that. So, I mean, being a founder is a constant being on and feel like you're always on. And I know also like really early on, you actually lost your CTO, Andrew. So do you mind sharing a little bit about this and what happened and how you guys really just kept going and building during that?
Yeah, for sure. A low point in the company and like my life personally. I guess the context on Andrew was back when I was at Morning Brew, I was like, again, self-taught software developer. Always had a chip on my shoulder that I didn't know what I was doing because I never went through like the 4 years of computer science classes to understand like best practices. Austin identified that at some point when we were scaling at Morning Brew as, I don't know, Tyler's 23 years old, self-taught, and now we're sending 2 million emails a day. We're making $15 million in revenue or whatever it is. And like the person who's running engineering is me. And again, like 24 self-taught software developer. So Austin went to his network of investors and one of them was good friends with this guy, Andrew Plotkin. And so Andrew was like a unofficial technical advisor to me. And at any point I was like, hey, I don't know which way to go with this like technical decision. He would jump in, give his feedback. He was 5, 6 years older, really smart, really sharp. He also saved my ass like a ton in the sense that many times like the website would go down at Morning Brew and I would panic, but like I never had a boss or like supervisor to fix my problems as a 24-year-old. So I either fixed it myself, which was very stressful, or like he would jump in and be able to help out and unblock us. And so that was my first experience with Andrew. Was incredibly smart. He wasn't getting paid by Morning Brew. He just wanted like the experience to help out. He was helping his friend who was an investor in Morning Brew. And then he just like wanted more touch points with like startups and learning how different startups worked. He was at like a separate startup in Chicago. That was how I met Andrew. That was our working relationship for like 2-ish years while I was at Morning Brew. And then so when I left Morning Brew, me, Ben, and Jake were in the side project, hustle, nights, weekends part of the company. It became clear that one, like Ben and Jake are 2 years younger or 3 years younger than me. And so like now it's me at 28 and then my 2 25-year-old co-founders, 3 engineers, me self-taught, them younger, less experienced, but really, really smart. That we kind of needed someone that had a bit more technical experience, has been there, done that, can help us like scale this company. Because it's very different building for 30 employees at Morning Brew versus hopefully hundreds of thousands of newsletters and users across the world at Beehiiv. So we brought on Andrew the summer of 2021, and he like willingly was like, I'll prove my worth. Like, you don't have to pay me. I will pitch in as like it wasn't even clear that he'd be CTO, but he just wanted to help. And he didn't ask for payment for like the first like 3 months. So we hustled. So it became us 4 basically before launch. summer 2021 into launch. We raised money in August of 2021. I quit, go full-time. Ben and Jake quit, go full-time. He quits his job after like a lot of convincing and finally asked to get paid for the first time after working for us for three-ish months at this point and became our CTO. And Andrew was like an absolute animal. So he was just very good at unblocking different people. He was the smartest person that I think any of us had ever worked with and was so sharp. And he ended up passing away early May of 2022. And that was right when we were out raising like our seed extension. And so as much stress and pain you can possibly deal with while I was getting told no by every VC, also losing the person who was leading the company. We were hitting like scaling issues for like the very first time. So like a total collection of shit show between needing a CTO who had experience, losing a friend and mentor, and like trying to raise money and being told no while I'm working remote from my room for 16 hours a day by myself. And so that was like probably the low point of the company. And like fortunately the team rebounded extremely well. Like Ben taught himself like a new coding language in like a week. Everyone picked up like different tasks and like we made it through it. Definitely a pretty tough and challenging experience for everyone involved on the team, and definitely the hardest thing that I've had to deal with.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry. I feel like that's so hard, especially as a founder and losing that. And given where you were at with the company, I feel like most people would either just give up or slow down. And I feel like you guys took that and continue to push forward and just prove like how much value you guys bring to the space. So I think it's truly awesome to see everything you're building, Tyler, and be on the sidelines and just see where you've been even for the year of knowing you. And I just want to switch it over for a sec. Like, where do you see the future of the space going? Like, it's constantly evolving. People are, obviously, we're in more of a digital world. And do you see the future, more and more newsletters growing, or what do you see?
Yeah, so I'm obviously very bullish in the newsletter space. As tools like Beehiiv become available and more functional and performative, like the barriers to entry are so low. And so like revisiting my time at Morning Brew, we had a custom website. We were using MailChimp. We had like a bunch of custom processes. It required a bunch of engineers to be able to create the referral program, create the data tools and like the growth dashboards to be able to do the custom elements, like everything else that we did within the newsletter space. And then we had a full sales team dedicated to selling the advertising spots in the newsletter. Now with tools like Beehiiv and like some of our competitors, like they've brought the barrier to entry to be so low and at such a low price point that you can get started in minutes, having a website that's extremely performant. You can contact your audience. You can do it for free, at least for us, up to 2,500 subscribers. So like you can get off the ground, test a thesis, and like do a weekly newsletter or a monthly newsletter without needing a ton of upfront capital, without committing much effort. You don't need a designer. You don't need to put in a ton of time. So I just think that the tools that are available, and then like, I think people are also growing to see the upside of newsletter businesses. So whether you are a content creator who has a large audience on TikTok or YouTube and want another channel to diversify and reach your audience, or you've seen many of the acquisitions in the newsletter space and understand that you can be a one-person operator who's really good at writing about whatever topic it is. And if there's an audience for it, which there most likely is, you can scale that very cost effectively. And advertisers want to get in front of these very niche audiences. And so it is a very profitable and scalable business. Whereas so many other businesses and mediums for whether it's video or content production are a little bit more costly and also like more difficult to pull off.
Tyler, you are a self-taught coder. You, I feel like, have grown Beehiiv so successfully. You just closed your Series A. Any advice for any like upcoming entrepreneurs who want to start something but don't know where, or just anything you want to tell the listeners today?
Yeah, so very top of mind because I had a call earlier where I gave this advice. I think you're on our investor updates as well. But I think from like month one since launching, I've always written very long, thorough investor updates because there's so many things happening in my head in parallel, from growth initiatives, product initiatives, different strategies we want to deploy. In order for me to stay on top of my own thoughts and what's going on in the business, I take like 5 to 6 hours every month and break down everything very thoroughly. And that's one, to communicate to our employees what's working, what's not working, what are upcoming initiatives, what are previous initiatives we launched that aren't going well. And then obviously like all the numbers and metrics around growth and revenue. And so our investor updates are more than just an investor update. I have friends, family, colleagues, people that I've met like once at a networking event who have just asked about the business a bunch. And so I've added them to our investor update. And so I give that as a recommendation to other entrepreneurs. That touch point is like extremely valuable. And I always have different asks in there, like whether we're hiring for a different role or we're looking for an advertising partner. There's people that have been on that list for 14 months who never said a single word. And like that 15th email, they'll respond with like, hey, I know someone looking to like get hired in that role, or I actually know the head of marketing at this company who I think would be a perfect fit. And so I think the more touch points you have with people that could be of value, or just like a great, to remain top of mind with friends, family, colleagues, investors, that exercise is something I've been surprised that a lot of entrepreneurs and startups don't have very thorough investor updates, because like they're there to help you if you give them an opportunity to. And it's not just investors. It can be that one person you met at a networking event last week. So that has expanded my potential success and touch points with a lot of people by sending those.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Tyler. I really appreciate your time. If anybody is not using Beehiiv for their newsletter, I highly suggest that you go ahead and use it to send emails out to your community. And Tyler, last question. I also know that you have a huge Spotify playlist for anybody who's sitting and working. What is the name of your playlist again, for people to go and listen to?
Yeah, I'm looking right now to see if we get any bump from the shout out here, but Big Desk Energy on Spotify. We're at 12,000 likes, follows. But it kicks ass. It's a great playlist for listening to while you're doing work. So highly recommend it.
Awesome. And also, if you want to follow along with Tyler's journey, visit his Twitter, which absolutely crushes it. He's a great shit poster at Denk, like _tweets. So thanks so much, Tyler. Appreciate your time.